are you at the moment in the UK?
So I'm up in North Oxfordshire, nearish Chipping Norton. Please don't mention Jeremy Clarkson or Chipping Norton set. We're on the other side. It's a beautiful part of the world, and we moved here actually about 20 years ago. Moved out of London with a 6-week-old baby, and we've sort of built our lives and our sort of, if you like, sort of property ownership over that period. Which we now have an office where I'm sat in, which has got a music studio that we rent out, which is part of our pension. We've got a house, a new build house that we built inside a hill just down there. And then we originally moved to a little thatched cottage, which we did a very sustainable restoration on about 15 years ago. And actually, there's a Ukrainian family living in there from Mariupol who don't have a home anymore. So that's where
Wow,
we're at.
that is fantastic. So, if you could take us back, Charlie, because you was actually born in Australia, you moved to the UK at the age of 10. When was it and how did it come about, your love for business, property, architectural design?
So my parents moved lived in central Sydney, in a place called Paddington, which at the time was a bit like Notting Hill in the 60s and 70s. It was very run down, full of winos and dog shit, basically. And it had been sort of all these lovely, lovely terraced houses like you get in Notting Hill in London had all been subdivided and split up and put on rent control. And the whole area had really gone down because everyone was moving out to the suburbs. Same sort of thing that was going on in England. My dad was in advertising, my mum in marketing, and they saw the opportunity to try and move back into the center of the city. So I grew up in a building site. My parents bought a house for for $40,000, and they'd never seen the top two stories, and there were rent control people that they couldn't get out. And they bought this house, and everyone said, "You are crazy." And we moved into this house, and they were doing it up and painting this and doing that and making a beautiful, beautiful house. And when they left, actually, I think it was the first $1 million selling house in central Sydney when it went to the people after when we left Australia. So I think it's in the blood. Do you know, do you know what I mean? I grew up there, and then my father likes architecture, and I remember walking around a Lutyens, an amazing architect called Lutyens. He built the last castle in this country called Castle Drogo, which is down on Dartmoor. Absolutely wonderful building, huge monumental stone, beautiful kind of shapes and lovely design sort of ideas going on. And I remember walking around and going, wow, there's a lot to this. And my dad pointed out something called an intersecting barrel vault. And I went, that's cool. I like this. And I was about 13. And from about 13, I wanted to do architecture.
Wow, great. And then you went to school. I take it you studied. And
Maths,
what was
physics,
your
art, did sculpture, went to Oxford Brookes, did architecture, then went to the Royal College of Art and did a master's in architecture at the Royal College of Art.
Right. So when we're talking about property and design and architecture, what are the key elements that really light you up and you found a real passion for and that you focused on in your career?
I think there's a few things that I really love. I love problem solving. Okay. I really love seeing a problem, analyzing it, and then creating a solution. And really that's what we do in architecture. We get a brief, there's a budget, there's a building, there's planning context, there's all of that stuff. And you have to try and find the best compromise, if you like, between all of those things. And I think really good architecture quite often is the art of the very best compromise. I think I love seeing a building which, in many ways, people can't see the wonder in it and finding something wonderful about it. I love, I'm very committed to sustainability and the environment. And I really love the idea that building can be an act of creation in the widest possible way in terms of creating, new ecosystems, improving the planet. And I think building can be that, in both socially and environmentally improving the planet. And and obviously I love coming up with an idea, working with the team, drawing something, and then seeing it built. I mean that, and then going back like 4 or 5 years later and seeing how it's become central to somebody else's life and is really working for them. And that there's really nothing quite like that.
Wow. It sounds like you just love to see the transformation.
Yeah,
You put your little bit of magic dust on this,
yeah,
and it's almost like you're putting your stamp on the universe. You're putting your stamp on the planet. but in a sounds like in a really positive way. And I love the outlook you're talking about sustainability. Can you give us some more information about that? What does that mean
Yeah.
to someone that doesn't understand this? And what's the government doing right now? And are we on track? And everyone's talking about this buzzword, but actually, are we doing the right things? And what are you doing? And what does it mean in layman terms?
So obviously, there's a problem with a biodiversity crisis. We're losing species at an incredible rate. I'm 50, and the number of wild animals has halved, more than halved in my lifetime. Okay, that's a real problem. We're living through one of the great extinction events on the planet. We're also we've also got global warming as a side part of that, and we've also got increasing like microplastics and pollution going into the environment. So there's a lot of challenges, right? But ultimately, we've also, so that's the sort of environmental sustainability thing, which I think we all focus on. But I also think there's a social sustainability thing where actually we look at improving the value and the lot of the most people that we can in humanity. And it's not really about some great big hippie communist idea. It's about saying, I think with the wealth out there on the planet and with the right design and the right thought, we can make everyone lead happier and healthier lives. And actually, that's just good business. Because if people are living in poor quality housing, they are not as healthy, they are not as happy. It costs us for social services, it costs the NHS, and it means people don't reach their full potential. And therefore, they don't generate the tax and become vibrant parts of our economy, which we need. So, to my mind, there's two parts of this sort of transition, if you like, from where we are into a more sustainable, both social and environmental sustainable place that we need to go on. And I think the government and the narrative has been very focused on the environmental sustainability. And I think we've forgotten to tell the story and focus on the social sustainability. And if we can't be kinder to each other, we can't be kinder to the planet. It just isn't going to happen. And I think that the pushback against net zero that is occurring on the right through to begin with the Tory party and increasingly through reform, and I can understand why people are pushing back, right? If your jobs are going and everything, and somebody says it's the fault of sustainability, of course you're going to push back on that. But that's because we're not telling a good enough story from the sustainability side. In housing and architecture, it's really important because buildings are responsible between 40 and 50% of all CO2 emissions in a developed economy. They produce around half the waste in a developed economy. They use 35% of raw materials. I mean, the stats go on. But architecture and building is hugely responsible for creating issues around sort of environmental sustainability and creating poor quality housing and therefore issues around social sustainability. But it can also be the solution. So, that's what makes me get up in the morning is like there is this massive thing that I'm a part of. Every time I speak to anyone involved in building, we are both the problem and the solution. And I believe that solution can be economically equitable, viable, and I believe it can make money because, that's what we're seeing from some of the work we're doing.
I think it's a wonderful topic that needs to be spoken about more and more and more, but it's just not in the forefront, is it, correctly in people's minds?
No.
What what really needs to happen, Charlie, over these next 1 to 5 years for this to have a much bigger impact?
Well, I think unfortunately, it's going to require government legislation, which is always problematic. I think there is a real issue around the disconnect between building a house and then just selling it to someone else. And there's a severance between the responsibility of creating a low energy building that's sustainable and then owning a low energy building that's sustainable. And that's, actually the benefits are long term. And we need to somehow link those so that as a property person, anyone listening to this podcast trying to make, get some money out of doing a good job. Obviously, most people tend to try and hit the minimum standards because they think, unfortunately, the market isn't mature enough to value sustainability yet. So I think the government needs to put some levers and possibly some carrots and some sticks in the market to encourage people to invest for the long term. What's really interesting in our work, we do a lot of what we call life cycle carbon analysis on our projects. Okay, so we model the building, the carbon associated, which is the energy associated and the carbon associated with building it. And then we look at the maintenance cycles on it for 60 years, and then how you take it down and reuse it. 60 years is just the standard they use in this bit of in this kind of protocol. It's kind of arbitrary date. But what we're finding is that what looks like a good decision today, like let's say a single ply flat, single ply membrane on a flat roof, because it's say 2/3 the price of a 3-layer felt, actually in terms of cost and carbon over 60 years, it's a bloody terrible idea because you got 4 roofs in 60 years, not 2 roofs. So it costs you more and it trashes the planet because it's a lot more carbon. And so if we can somehow understand that, we can then use that to incentivize people to sort of buy once and buy well. Like I'm sure your grandparents would say to you today, if they were standing over your shoulder, they'd say, buy once and buy well. Now, I totally understand the market isn't set up to incentivize that. But if we've now got the data to understand that's a fact, then it's a finance issue. So now we need the finance boys and girls to come in and create ways of helping us to buy once and buy well, because there's long-term savings. And that to me is one of the most interesting areas of the market, I think, going forward. I'm really passionate about this life cycle carbon analysis, partly because, to my mind, carbon and cost are very, very similar. So we're doing projects where we're really driving down the carbon, embodied carbon when we're building them, and the in-use carbon. So very, very cheap to run, and finding that they can be surprisingly cheap to build, because we're using lots of secondhand materials. We're really driving in efficiency, being really disciplined with design, and using using technology and data modeling and stuff to get incredible efficiency in our builds. And we're building for as cheap as just bog standard building, because we're using technology and thinking, and actually it's quicker on site, and modern methods of construction, all of that kind of stuff. So that's very exciting. I think the market will lead on this, provided the government doesn't do a massive U-turn.
It's obviously a huge amount of work that's needed, but where there's a will, there's a way. And if there's enough great people like you, Charlie, and it definitely is going to come down to a lot of people being on the same page. My business partner, Jay Munoz, he is massive into sustainability, and he's just built his dream home in Colchester, and he is completely carbon neutral. His electric bill last year was like £2 or something ridiculous. Yeah. Everything is sustainable, everything is renewable. And it was just a wonderful project to see him do that. And he also mentioned there were a few elements which were slightly more expensive, but actually the entire project cost about the same as a normal traditional build.
Yeah. I mean, great. I think that there's no hard and fast figure, but we're looking at, I would say maximum 5% to go from a standard developer-led house to one that's very, very low energy, very low energy. And what's interesting about that is that we simply can't carry on building in the way that we have been traditionally. The carbon emissions are just too high so we've got a certain amount of carbon left before we get to really critical points of heating. And you've seen the weather recently. It's nice for a few days, but 30, 32, 33, that's hot. I sort of have enough of that after a couple of days. And I grew up in Australia.
So let's say we've got people tuning in and they are going to be building their own dream home. I'm actually building a villa myself out in Marbella, number one to run retreats, but also for the family. Or we've got some small developers that are doing commercial conversions, taking an office and converting them into, say, 8 or 9 flats, or they found a piece of land and they're now going to build 4 or 6 houses. When we talk about sustainability and renewables, just to share some of your knowledge, what are some of the things that they should be doing in that build to help the bigger cause?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So what are the principles that we run by? And I think the main principle would be thermal modeling. Okay, so building a computer model, if you like, of the thing that you want to do, and understanding what the running costs are likely to be, the energy demand, and critically the overheating. How hot is that building going to get? So it's Part O, sorry, of the new building regulations. And we've been thermal modeling for about 12 years, and mainly to stop overheating. Because so if you do that, you can then drive up the insulation to the point where the amount of heating you have is so little, you don't need air source heat pumps. You don't need traditional wet heating systems. And actually, what we're starting to do is put far infrared mesh systems plastered into the ceiling. Incredibly, there's no moving parts, right? So they just don't break. They're made from recycled carbon fiber. They've got incredibly low embodied carbon, and actually, you never get, if you've got a low energy building, you never get the money back from an air source heat pump. It just never pays for itself. And then you put in a hot water cylinder with a very small air source heat pump on that. They're about 1,800 quid. So with the right thinking, you can just strip out a whole lot of complexity and hassle, a whole lot of complexity and hassle. And I think that's the main kind of mindset of like, what can I do to make this simpler? Because the more stuff I put in here, the more cost and the more carbon. How do I drive the simplicity whilst keeping, the quality that I'm after? And so thermal modeling is the first one. Lots of insulation, lots of breathability. We're very focused on using mechanical ventilation heat recovery. So that is a system which draws stale warm air out of kitchens and bathrooms and utilities, puts it through a heat exchanger, then puts fresh warm air into bedrooms and sitting rooms. And if you've got an insulated building, putting in an air source heat pump and getting the building airtight will drop your heating bills by 50%, 60%, because it's all the ventilation where your heat losses are, because it's not getting lost through the walls. It's then getting lost through the fact, you need to breathe. And actually that's really good for the internal air quality. It filters the air. It's good for asthma. It's good for hay fever. And you get a really nice even temperature. So doing those two things, you can actually drive out a lot of cost and use the cost that you've saved to pay for these other things. So, but think a lot, spend some money on good design and good modeling and good understanding. I think so. I've read this brilliant book actually called How Big Things Get Done. Right? It's a great book. It's about massive projects and why they work and why they fail. And the logic, and the guy in there said, think slow, act fast. Right? So do your planning, make the mistakes in a computer, make the mistakes on a desk. Yes, they're fees, and everyone hates spending fees because it's like, I'm not spending it on the build, I'm spending it on fees and that guy's car, and that's annoying. I get that. But the problem is when you're building, you're at your most exposed to financial headwinds and shocks in the system. That is when you are during the build, you are most exposed. So if you spend a bit longer thinking and you can build quicker, it is a far better way to guarantee a successful project. And that long-term thinking allows you to be efficient and drive down cost and drive down energy and end up as your partner did with a build that basically costs the same and then costs nothing to run.
Wow. Wow, that's brilliant. Honestly, some really, really actionable, sound advice and tips there. So let's talk about dreaming your dream home. You've done a lot of work on the television. As a public figure, you've been a TV presenter, you've worked with some incredible people. You was on a show called Building the Dream,
Yes.
on a TV show.
100 shows called Building the Dream.
100 show. Wow,
Yeah.
that was a long time. Can you share a moment that moved you and where you saw a dream become a reality during that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned so much on those shows, those property programs that I did. I mean, there was a lot of driving around the country, a lot of standing on very cold building sites, not actually building, which means you get really cold, but watching people struggle and succeed in nearly all cases to create the home for them was so inspiring. And the thing that connected all the success stories was planning. And that's why, I said what I said earlier is like, if you said what linked them all, it's like people who planned the crap out of it basically nailed it and had a great outcome. People who didn't had much more difficult journeys. So whatever you're thinking of building, you need to be so on the detail, so ahead of the game, so planned. That is the thing that will link success. And too many projects to really talk about, but endlessly amazed at the ability of people to achieve fantastic outcomes, and at really good value. And what it really made me believe, and I'm a great passionate advocate of self-build, because this country has ridiculously low self-build rates. I think England's about 5%, the UK is about 7%. The next lowest is Holland at 25%. So we are a
Wow.
freak outlier of a country. But Belgium, Austria, 80, 90%, right?
Ooh.
So where's all that money going? All that money is going into 8 big companies that build 60% of the houses. What has the housing system become? All the planning system become about controlling that land. So those people, whether they want that or not, get that land and get those projects. It's an absolute disaster. And it's stopping people from having the learning and the value making exercise of building their own houses. And it makes me slightly cross.
So let's have a look at what you do, Charlie. So anyone listening to this that is going to get into property or they're working on some projects, um, how could they come and connect with you? What does your company actually do? If you and what projects are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, so yeah, as I said, we're an 11-person company. We're called Charlie Luxton Design, and we do architecture, and we start from right at the very beginning with meeting a client and looking at the brief and the budget and the site and understanding that what it can, how we can bring brief budget and place together, right? And that's really a lot of the work, and working with people to understand what their pressure points are. Is it actually money, or is it the budget? Because they'll tell you one thing, and half the time it's a journey of discovery for them. We'll work through that, very, very focused on planning, because without planning, it's all just paper. And frankly, I don't want to make drawings. I want to make buildings. So really focused on planning. I think we've got an incredible planning record. And then we work through planning, we work through detailed design. We can take that as light, or as, in some places we end up doing gardens, we end up designing furniture, we end up choosing light fittings and do interiors as well. We do the full service. In other places, we get planning and do some sort of timber kit stuff. In fact, and then we can be on site, contract administrate or not. So we're basically here as a service for whatever people want us to do. Within that, we do a lot of, we've been working over the last 12 years on a pre-cut timber I-beam system. So timber I-beams are incredibly efficient way of using timber. They are kind of an engineered lumber, if you like. And we build a model of the building in a computer. We take that into a spreadsheet. We take that into a cutting software and an optimization software. And we can cut and label timbers and deliver a whole kit to the house ready to be built on site, with a big sort of flat pack kit of parts, if you like. And we can do that, we think, at about 25% cheaper than the equivalent passive type frames that are out there on the market. And we're constantly cross value. So we do a lot of different things. And I think the key thing is that we're here to support people in whatever service they need, but really with this focus on driving down cost and driving down carbon, which also equates to cost in many ways.
Right. It sounds like an all-in service,
Yeah.
which could be incredible for some of the listeners here. So anyone, Charlie, looking to get into property investing, property developing, building their own home, growing a team, becoming an entrepreneur, what would be some of your words of inspiration or motivation that you personally would like to share, having done the journey you've done?
I think properties is quite slow, and I think accepting that this stuff takes time, and the greatest sort of lubrication, if you like, in the planning system is time. If you can have a slightly longer time horizon, I think you can get a lot more out of a plot and out of a build. As I said, planning is absolutely central. I think slow and deeply and act fast. I really can't stress that enough as a strategy for getting a good project. I know people hate spending fees. I absolutely get that. But I think, and I would say this, I think fees are some of the best money you ever spend on any of your projects. And when I'm doing my own projects, my God, I spend it on the planning consultant, the ecologist, the structural engineer. And when I actually add up the hours that my team spend on doing the stuff I do, it's quite, but then I build really effectively because I've made the mistakes in a computer, which is a hell of a lot cheaper than making them on site. And I've optimized it on a computer. And then I think in terms of entrepreneur and building a business, I think it's about really hiring well and trusting people, but working with them. I think your team is your strength, and it can also be a weakness. But I think, our team here is fantastic. We're actually in the process of becoming an employee ownership trust. So, we are moving into a completely employee owned business, because I think, there's a long game here that everyone can be a part of. And I think sometimes doing better for other people is actually better for yourself. And I suppose these are the things that I think are really important. And I think when you're trying to build and do planning and design, always think what the person next to you might think, right? Whether that's the person next to you in a meeting, or the person who owns the house next to you, or the person in the opposite to you in the meeting, the planning. Think about how everyone else is triangulating your actions and your projects, and then listen to what you think they might be thinking, and you will find your things, your projects happen better, and you actually get not exactly what you want, because the art of good negotiation is both sides are like, well, I nearly got what I want, and I think often that's the way you get the thing away, and you get a success.
Nice. I love that. You know what? Absolutely fantastic. Charlie, what is next for you over the next 10 years?
So we've got some really extraordinary projects. We're trying to build a wild park on the outskirts of Oxford to connect people to nature, so we can try and stop the biodiversity issues that we've got. We're looking at a 60-acre housing project and working with a load of communities to try and understand how a new sustainable settlement can take the pressure off villages that we all know are getting absolutely trousered by new development, because there's no investment in the infrastructure. So can we take that development and put it in a place and actually make a genuinely sustainable community? Yeah, we're doing quite a lot of work with communities. We've just finished a 12-unit community land trust building project here in our village, with a work hub and car club and microgrid, and that's been a real excitement. So I think more placemaking, more community building. I'd like to sort of start working at a bigger scale, I think, because I think that's where the developers aren't getting it right. And I think the developer-led system we've got in this country is incredibly brittle, because the product is, in my opinion, crap. So I think there's a great opportunity there to disrupt. That's what I'm going to be targeting. Going to try and take down the big eight.
It sounds like you said you're 50, right? It sounds like you're not slowing down, you're speeding up. That's what I keep telling myself every year. Don't slow down, speed up, keep moving,
Keep moving.
keep changing the world. And what a really really interesting podcast. Charlie, can you just share your website, or where someone can hook you up, maybe on Instagram, if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, so it's charlieluxtondesign.com, and then the Instagram and email and studio at charlieluxtondesign.com, and I think it's at Charlie Luxton Design. I don't even know. You're testing me now. You'll find everything there on the website. It's www.charlieluxtondesign.com, and there's some, very. I'm going to sound really arrogant, but there's some very beautiful buildings on there that we've done. The team, and this is the key thing. It's a team game, architecture, that the team have done, we've done together. And I think what's really important is that we don't have a style, we have an approach, and that is, and the client is as much a part of what that building is always. The client is center to what that building comes out as. So yeah, I think that sort of sums up what we're trying to do.
So if you are somebody that really wants to create more wealth for you and your future, then why don't you look at becoming a professional property investor, where you can take advantage of the UK's #1 asset class and make passive income and also capital appreciation. So I'd invite you now to click the link in the comments or the bio and go and access my latest book called Property Success. This is where I introduce you to the 7 step-by-step system known as the Property Freedom Formula that I have used personally to do over £31 million worth of property development. So go and do that right now. I really hope you enjoy this asset, and it could be the difference that makes the difference and gets you up and running in the next 90 days.